All right. All right, welcome. So I'm here with
Thank you, sir.
my good friend Delali Avemega. And Dela was trying to do the math this morning. I think we've known each other since 1999, right? So that's what,
Yeah, 1999. Yeah, yeah.
like
it's
23
been,
years.
it's been,
Yeah.
yeah,
So that's, in terms of my
long.
long-standing friends, you are high up on that list. We're getting to
I know.
our 25th anniversary very soon. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's been amazing, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so maybe why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what you do, and we jump into some other questions.
Okay. So I am an author, an artist. This time around, I don't like to use the designer,
Yeah,
but I consider myself more of an artist because I think I've veered into a little more than just designing. So maybe that qualifies. I mean, or I qualify for that. So yes, artist, author, and a creative. I'm just trying as much as possible to identify areas that I can, contribute in terms of finding solutions to making life better and more meaningful. So
yeah,
that's who
great,
I am.
wonderful. And I should have mentioned that Dela is an artist based in Ghana, West Africa, right? And
Yeah,
this interview is going to be focusing on a book that you've written. You have written a lot of books, and you also illustrate as well, right?
yeah,
We're going to be talking a lot more about the book, The Yellow Hat, right?
yeah.
So let's dive into that. What inspired you to write it, and how did you develop some of the characters? Because it's kind of an interesting mix being an author and an illustrator, right? And
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
obviously some work that goes into crafting stories, but at the same time,
yeah,
crafting a
absolutely.
story and then illustrating it. Can you just talk to us about how the whole inspiration came about?
So thank you. So Lulu is a character I created a while back. I think sometime 2012. In fact, my eldest daughter is the vision behind it. Initially, when I created it, I didn't know what to do with it. So it had been lying on my machine for a couple more years until I felt there was the need to, develop stories for her because then I wasn't too happy with the kind of stories we had, here, storybooks that were being sold here and that sort of thing. I wanted something that was more locally relevant, something that my daughter would be able to relate, to and that sort of thing. So that was how Lulu came about. Now, for this particular story, the Yellow Hat, what inspired it was I felt, in Ghana here, even some adults don't really get the whole concept of taxation, So you have to be pretty much educated or have some level of education to to be able to appreciate what taxation is and its implementation, the effects, the benefits, and things like that. And I thought it was a problem because growing up, to be honest, my very early years, I never heard that word. I never knew anything of that sort existed until I grew up. And even going through like the tertiary, what's it called, the level of education. Yeah, every now and then it comes up, but I think you're quite aware of, the whole chew and pour model, how people here typically would just learn for an examination and not learn to, have that knowledge and keep that knowledge for the rest of their life. So I felt, look, it's important, or it would be important to drum this thing into the minds of kids very early for them to sort of be introduced to the whole concept of taxation. So along the way, kids can even hold, people responsible. Basically, a kid should be able to know that things are supposed to be done in a certain way for us to benefit as a people, as a society, as a country, and that sort of thing. So that's what, sort of inspired the story.
Yeah,
And to also add to this, I felt that if you just threw taxation as a concept to kids in its raw form, it wouldn't be interesting. So then I had to craft, a story, start from a point, and twist things a bit, make it more interesting, so that they could, appreciate it some more and then accept it, and then it will make more sense to them. Yeah.
That's really cool. One of the things that I've always admired about your work for as long as I've known you is that you have a very keen awareness of global affairs, politics, and at the same time, you always try and bring in, the artistic flair and the, interesting stories that are not cliched or they are not forced. So it's interesting that you're telling a story about a child, and if any kid picked up the book and read it, I mean, there are mature themes in there, like taxations and things like that, but it's still an interesting story to read, right? So I think that's really, really cool. So I want to talk a little bit more about some of these sub-narratives that you included in there. So I noticed in the opening section of the book, all right, you introduced some of the themes like Lulu waiting for her grandmother to end the conversation so that they may leave the market. And, she gets distracted by the yellow truck, typical of a little child, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, you mention in that sequence, you introduce a concept about politeness and respect toward elders, because you state somewhere, you stated that the people who were selling were respectful towards Lulu's grandmother. So how important is that aspect of that attribute of respect and kids learning how to, show courtesy to others? And can you talk to us about?
So I mean, these are key social values that we promote here, and these are things we grew up, being taught. So, for instance, as a kid, you can't interrupt two elderly people when they're having a conversation. There's a way you interact with the elderly over here. Courtesy, basically. I mean, these are things that they instill. I mean, we instill, our culture instill in kids at a very early age. Politeness, when you're dealing even with strangers, you have to be polite and know how you address them, know how you talk to them, and when to interrupt, when not to interrupt, and things like that. So these are key cultural values that are being promoted, and I grew up in a home or in an environment where these things were instilled in us. So it's more like having to carry on that tradition, and then also instill that into the next generation and generations after. So it's it kind of drums it home, so the kids, if they don't learn this living in the house, they can pick some of these things and the stories that I present to them, so that society wouldn't look upon them as miscreants, but well brought up kids.
Yeah, thank you. That's really cool. How I've always wondered, because you're talking about, and for me as an adult, when I read a story, and because I've lived in Ghana, I lived in Ghana for 30 years, I know what you are talking about. When you talk about, them keeping the bottles so that they can dispose of them properly when they get home. I know you are making a sort of tacit remark about environmental cleanliness, and because it's an issue, right, where people don't really regard that. But how do you strike that balance between, bringing up some of these advanced, for lack of a better expression, these important issues, but at the same time keeping it a basic story that children can enjoy? Maybe talk to us about how you are thinking from the perspective of Lulu.
Yeah. So here's the thing. We have certain challenges, as a people, as a society, and even as a country. Like, one of the key issues we have presently over here is how we, how we sort of tackle waste, and you have a global, definitely there's a global issue at stake, how things are sort of getting out of order, and that sort of thing. And I feel that some of these things, the kids probably will be the best people to sort of educate, because adults already are grown and people have their various reasons for behaving the way they behave. But if these things are instilled in the kids early, then it kind of helps tackle the problem. So, for instance, how to dispose of the bottles in the story is a way of trying to address a problem that is presently quite big over here. Now, and in writing the story, I'm trying to get things, or to make us have an idea of how Lulu sees things from her, point of view. I have to, rely on the child inside me, within me. And so you'll be amazed that in writing these stories, I quickly or consciously sort of, try to think as a 10-year-old, as a 9-year-old, how would they appreciate the thing? What will be their view on the thing? How are they going to, basically react, different. So I take off my adult, thinking cap and quickly put that of the kids' thinking cap on. And luckily or fortunately, I have kids who, are within that age range as well. So I'm able to sort of look at them and sometimes even have some interactions with them, or, study them, pay attention to them and see how they, sort of react to things. And that, I think, helps me, gives me more insight in how to present or package the stories for them to make meaning to, my audience, and also for them to, make sense. Yeah.
Wonderful. The story is about a girl who discovers yellow tracks in her town, right? And she's a very curious little girl. She asks a lot of questions. She has a grandmother in there. She has a school teacher, and there are these builders and workers who come into her community, and they are trying to put up a health center. How have children that, I'm assuming this is targeted at children 8 to 10 years old, thereabout. How
Yes.
have
Yeah.
Ghanaian children that you have read the story to, have been exposed to the story, how have they responded to it?
It's been amazing. It actually happens to be one of the favorite books for these kids, and I quite remember when I first launched it. I had a reading session, and there and then the kids afterwards, during the Q&A parts, I mean, it was obvious that the kids finally understood what taxes were. Most of those kids, I want to believe all of them probably came into the space and didn't have the slightest idea as to what taxes were. And probably even know that we were paying monies for certain things to be done, or for a certain, for us to benefit from certain things, and all that. So at the end of reading sessions, I noticed that the kids sort of, get to appreciate what taxes are. And there's a possibility, who knows, these kids might be meeting some government officials and might be asking them certain questions, as in, why don't we have, for instance, a health post in our, community? Why don't we have running water in our community, and things like that? So it's a way of, kids being able to also, hold adults who, occupy certain positions responsible. And it's been very effective, I must say.
That's wonderful. I'm glad to hear that they are responding really well to it, because I
Yeah.
think the issue of taxation in Ghana is, it is a problem, just in terms of our understanding of what they are for, and even a system that can facilitate, proper taxation seems to have been an issue for a long time. But yeah, I think it's good that, so maybe my final question on that front, just in terms of your creative strategy, will be, why a book, right? if you want to teach children, you sort of catechizing children to understand some of these, governmental affairs and social issues
Yeah.
and all that. But why do you choose to use the format of a book?
Well, it's because you consider where I come from, where I live, and how many people have access to other channels besides books. So it's I think a book is probably the easiest way to get to these kids, or to get these kids to read stories. I mean, other than what happens in the West, where there's much development there, and kids can afford to be given tablets and other materials. But I mean, Ghana is a developing country, in terms of when you even say things, or you consider things like smartphone penetration and things like you have areas that don't even have these facilities, and these people don't own these gadgets there. But a book, I think, is something that almost everyone can have access to, can afford to keep in their homes and in their spaces. So I felt it would it's more, I mean, convenient, if you ask me.
Great. So just following up on that a little bit more,
Mhm.
how do you think, the medium, which is a book, because for this project, I'm as a design researcher, I'm also interested in the medium itself, right? And whether you
Yeah.
consider other media like video, audio, online, and all that, right? What do you think the medium itself does to the message that you're trying to convey? Like, how would it be different if you put it out in a different format? If you put out the same story in a different format?
I think if you ask me, a book probably should be the starting point, but then you could always build on that, because the disadvantages with books is, um, how they can be, kept, how well they can be kept in certain conditions, and it's not interactive. You can, I mean, with the book, yes, they get to see, I mean, what's happening, but they get to, they have to use their imagination to sort of create certain scenes in their minds and things like that. But with other mediums, you're talking about interactivity. For instance, if you have to turn these things into an animated, series, then you're going a step further. It's so. I think the book is a starting point, but I would love, to develop it some more, so that, if possible, as much as I can, explore in terms of the avenues, in terms of the channels, yes, I'll be grateful, because then that gives me more room to, putting more things in there that typically I can't achieve with a book, if you ask me. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the books are certainly more accessible, especially for
Yeah.
developing countries, right? Because it doesn't take
Yeah.
too many overheads to be able to just
Yeah.
get people together and read a book, right? Uh,
Yeah.
so I think that's great. I want to talk about something which I put in my proposal when I was thinking about this project, because we all know Ghana's rich heritage of folk tales like Anansi stories and other stories.
Yeah.
Why do you think that these stories never quite made the leap from being orally distributed stories that were just told around the bonfire, to they never quite make the jump? Even when you talk about book formats, I don't recall growing up, that there was a mainstream production of books about Anansi tales. A lot of the Anansi tales that I know were mostly oral, and I think
Mhm.
some of them, I remember reading a few books actually, so let me correct myself there. And I remember also that at some point there was this TV show by the Fireside, and they started bringing some of that into telling some of these folk tales on the television medium, and there was some radio as well, but it never really quite stuck, right? Why do you think that is? Why are we losing our rich African heritage of folk tales? Is it something to do with the medium in terms of the development of our country? And and the story is not really fitting the context in which the medium is progressing?
Yeah, it's a complex. If you ask me, it's a complex question, and I think the to get an answer that would suit it, I think would be a bit difficult, be complex. But here's what I think, because I've had this discussion a few times with some people, and I believe we were kind of comfortable back in the day with oral, stories or oral presentations of our stories, because that is what I think our ancestors or those who were around previously would typically do. At some point in time, I think I'd say at some point we probably slept on some of these things. We probably didn't get the value. I mean, see the value and of curating them and having them in book form. And I think somewhere along the line, when the whole concept of libraries came, we had other books coming from the West and sort of would I say absorbing or saturating the space. And so a whole lot of things, a whole lot of factors, if you ask me. And publishers, I also think that locally you didn't have too many publishers, and probably there were certain constraints. You might want to talk about finance. That's one. So when people are kind of looking at the finances and trying to consider what's feasible, maybe some of the concerns will be, okay, how many people probably would want to buy an Anansi book over a Goldilocks, over a Red Riding Hood, and I also think presentation too is another thing, because with the few Anansi books I have seen, to be very honest, if you look at how they're presented in terms of design, in terms of even the illustrations, over a Goldilocks, over Snow White, over a Cinderella, kids, there's a way kids sort of appreciate these things. So I think a whole lot of factors, which is why I think it's a very complex question, complex issue that needs to be viewed from different points. Yes.
And I think that's really interesting that you talk about presentation. You're right, because I think as designers, we also understand that there is a difference between the content and then the presentation. And then you have the third layer, which might be an issue of distribution, right? So what I'm gleaning from you is that it's not really a content problem, because our stories are interesting, but it's rather being
absolutely
it's been a problem with the presentation, which is a quality of production, and also just lack of finances to distribute it widely, right? So
yes.
So, what are we doing about that? What are you as an artist, designer, author, what are you doing to, be able to put out, not make the same mistakes that were made in the past, right? Where we sort of neglect the African stories because we are lacking in the areas of quality of presentation and also distribution. So maybe speak to those two aspects, which is a quality of presentation.
So per my experience so far, I think because I've been, to be very honest, and I'd say this, this is probably the first time I'm going to probably say this publicly, considering who you'd be sharing this with. I've been thinking about the Anansi stories, and probably repackaging them, some of them in a way that would make them appealing to kids, because believe you me, we are, content is quite, there's saturation of all over the place. And so kids literally have so much to choose from. I mean, and when, from the very onset, when the thing doesn't really hit them, they don't even want to, patronize it. So it's, first of all, trying to repackage these Anansi stories so that they kind of look appealing to the kids of this generation, and also how to now present Anansi, probably make a few adjustments here and there. And well, I might say make him look a bit more modern, and so he fits into like the times, the era, and then that way convey whatever message we want to convey, and give them the stories as we want them to have them. The other thing has got to do with the packaging. So I think with Anansi, if I have to tackle that from my point of view, I'm looking at going a bit further with it. So you might want to consider books as a basis, and then might want to move from that to like other forms of presentation. So interactivity, animation. You could even come up with like puzzles and all sorts of things, basically, like board games and things like that. So they they kind of imbibe it to an extent where it's there on their minds, for them to appreciate it. So I think if we have to tackle that we have to look at a different approach that fits the times, because if we have to lift Anansi from 20, 30 years ago when we were younger and sort of bring that same, thing over these kids, trust me, I don't think they would pay much attention to it. And I've personally had a few engagements with kids. Some of them don't seem interested, in that whole Anansi story thing. And for some, it's like, well, they've heard about Anansi, but they don't know much, about it. So I think that's how I would probably tackle it, which is something I'm thinking about, to be very honest. It's something I've been thinking about for a while now.
Yeah, you should. I mean, I think with your skills, and one thing I would say about the Yellow Hat is not only is the story really rich and multi-layered with much depth in there, but also the illustration. I mean, as long as I've known
Thank you.
you've always been a fantastic illustrator. You
Thank you.
you draw with ease. I've always been jealous of that gift that you have. Whereas many others just struggle. You just take a pencil and it just comes out of you like it's easy money. So
I still consider myself a learner, trust me.
right. But maybe just bringing this to a close, I want to ask you maybe a couple of questions, right? So
Yeah, sure.
what do you think, just taking the book Yellow Hat, if you imagine it in an online format,
Yeah.
what would that mean for the story? And the reason why I'm asking this, just to give you a little bit of context, is I'm thinking, is there something intrinsic to African stories, or maybe the way you tell your stories, that requires a different presentation online from just a generic story like Goldilocks or whatever? You put a story online. I'm trying to understand, how should we cater stories with the particular intricacies of the story in mind, with a Yellow Hat in your case, right? How does that transition to an online format when you imagine it?
So the thing is, considering the age bracket that I wrote that book for, or considering the age bracket the book is meant for, and so there are limitations. To be very honest, with the book, there are limitations. So you want to consider the attention span and things like that. And so there are times when you want to say a lot, but you have to literally summarize it, so you don't kind of lose them at some point. If you ask me, I think if I have to get this book, sort of repackaged for like the online, platform, I think then that sort of breaks that limitation, because then there's room to add more, and there's more you can literally do for the kids to be engaged every now and then. So it's not just a boring story. It's not just a story that sort of ends at a certain point, and the kids will read it probably twice, thrice, and then they've had enough of it. But I think when it becomes interactive, to be honest, like I want kids to feel like they're in the story, they're part of the story. Simply, that's the thing. And one of the reasons why I've also presented my stories in the way I present them is because I want kids who are not Africans, or kids who could be Africans but are not necessarily based here in Africa, to be able to appreciate, what we are, who we are, and how we think and how we do things. So for a kid, for instance, who probably is heard about Africa but doesn't know Africa, if they read my book, what I expect them to get out of it is to understand how we live, and basically what we do, and have an idea, have a sense of what it's like life here in Africa is. So I think interactivity, or having an online presence in that way would further, sort of enhance, the message, would further enhance the response that I wanted to get out of, the readers.
Right. There is a big mistake that we typically make, as designers or even as content creators, which is you take a format, a story which is in the book format, and you just translate it directly, like a PDF onto the internet, right? But then the medium, because it's a different medium, it does affect how that content is perceived. So I think what as content creators, as designers, we always need to think about how the medium itself changes the story. I don't think it changes the actual goals or the trajectory, the main trajectory of the story, but I think it should do something different to it. So my final question to you will be that what are some of the sub themes in the Yellow Hat that, if you had an online format, what are some sub themes that you would like to explore? Just as you may picture your story as in the middle of a spider's web, right? So what are some of these branches, tangents that you would take from the story into other avenues if you have the opportunity to do so?
Yeah, so so overall, I think one of the key imports here is introducing these kids to something new. So that's the whole concept of taxation. But in there, you're looking at relationship as a theme. You're looking at social responsibilities as well as a theme. You're looking at what's the word? For instance, you're looking at recycling. For instance, it's a theme in there as well. You're looking at care, kindness, respect, courtesy, and yeah. So these are some of the themes. If you ask me, some of the themes that I probably would say yes. So all these themes that are showcasing different values that typically people should get and adopt to make the world a more better place, if you ask me. So yeah, that's it. If I have to sort of break it down, that's what I'm looking at. So different themes: relationships, social responsibilities, care, kindness, love, all these things are embedded there. So it's not just one particular thing in this case, but all these which could be further broken down.
I want to give you an opportunity to maybe tell us where we can find your book, The Yellow Hat, and the Lulu series. There is also it's a series, I should have mentioned, right? So there is more than one book to it.
Yes.
Where is it available, and what are your plans for that particular series, or any other thing that you're working on?
Yeah, so I have most of the stories on Amazon, and other book online shops. I think online Barnes and Nobles and some other websites. So once you Google in Delali Avemega, you find Delali Avemega. You look for Delali Avemega books, I think it would show up and you could see the whole collection. So Lulu, for now, we have about 12 titles, and then we have a couple more books for toddlers, with different characters, Bobo and other characters. And we have some interesting 2 books that I wrote on very prominent key contributors to like the whole African story as well. So quite a number of books in total. I have 23 titles published so far, and 5 of them have been translated into Spanish and French. So yes, you can look at that. If you're looking for them locally, you can contact some of the bookshops, and also contact me directly. On Instagram, it's Fish and Plankton Books. Fish and Plankton, as in PLANKTON, Plankton Books. Yes, you can find us on Instagram, and also on Facebook is Fish and Plankton Books as well. Yes.
Well, thank you very much, Delali.
Thank you, Kofi.
This has been awesome, and I want to at some point do this again with you, and then we can talk about Delali the artist, because you do way more than writing books and illustrating them, right? So this is only a slice of what your creative capabilities are. So
I look forward to that.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You have a great day.
Yeah.